In this video, I set out to define which videos from ERB are the most classic and the biggest blunders of the series at the same time. It was tough to put this list together, as this is probably the most consistently good and well-produced series on the internet, and with the longevity Pete and Lloyd have had, that's impressive. There were some mistakes along the way though, and we'll get to those, but either way, I'm just excited to talk about this series. So let's just get into the list. When this episode came out, I think people were excited to see an all-female battle. There was Lady Gaga versus Sarah Palin in the first season, but Pete was in that one, so a lot of fans didn't really see that as a truly woman versus woman matchup. I don't think it was executed very well though. Let's start with the structure. For some reason, they split up the battle into 3 verses for Marilyn and 2 verses for Cleopatra, which doesn't make sense, and to my knowledge hasn't been done at any other point in the series, save for Nye versus Newton, and that almost made it onto the worst list anyway. It doesn't make sense why you'd give one of the characters an extra verse, especially when the extra lines they added weren't that great. In fact, not many of the lines in this battle at large were great. They're all about dissing the guys these characters hooked up with, and other really surface level comparisons. And neither character gives a very scathing line that hurts the other character that much. When William Wallace says, "You're the father of your country, but I'm your daddy," everyone feels it.
You'll lose this battle like your bout with barbiturate.
Just doesn't hit the same as some of the other burns we've seen in this series. This whole battle just seems off, which is why it's on the worst list. When the internet was speculating on this battle back before it was set to release, a lot of people were expecting a really good battle, as was I. So much of this battle is cleverly written and delivered philosophical lines, said by really interesting portrayals of these historical philosophers. All of the characters and the versions of them shown in this battle have really good chemistry, and it had to be that way if you think about it. If you just had 3 separate battles of philosophers against each other, not only would the audience want more variety, but it wouldn't be the right way to do this kind of matchup. I think ERB needed to have a battle where characters on the same side could distinguish themselves from each other. Let 2 guys on the same side disagree with each other. It's something we never got in, say, Ghostbusters versus Mythbusters, for example, and it was a very good direction to take this battle. Not only that, but the philosophical references to this battle are very well done. They clearly did their research here, and it gives the characters more personality, because they all act like the philosophies they espouse, and that reinforces all of the other good aspects of this battle. There are 6 words said by the announcer at the end of every battle.
Who won? Who's there? You decide!
This battle defies that, and by the nature of these sorts of things, this battle defies the essence of what makes ERB so great. ERB is a very fan-centric show, possibly the most fan-centric of any internet series of its size. To see them create a matchup specifically so a certain character can win really insults the audience, in a way that they possibly didn't intend. Jefferson's second verse really seems like wasted air. All it is him apologizing for his hypocrisy. Any matchup where a character has to do that is dead on arrival. If you wanted to pit Frederick Douglass against someone, why not Susan B. Anthony? If you wanted to pit Thomas Jefferson against someone, why not Alexander Hamilton? There are far more interesting connections with those 2 matchups. In this battle, you have 2 characters with very few connections, where one character obviously has the leg up on the other perceptually. If you pitted Adolf Hitler against someone like Captain America, sure, you could point out the one connection that the Nazis fought against America, but that doesn't mean it would be a good matchup, and you'd be robbing the audience of their chance to decide who wins in the process. Sometimes the best battles aren't always the ones with the deepest, most cryptic lines or the most complicated flows. Sometimes ERB is at its best when Pete and Lloyd do what they do best, and do really good portrayals of characters. Terminator vs. RoboCop is an example of this. This was already a really good matchup, as there are a lot of similarities to explore between the 2 characters. The lyrics do a fine job of exploring these similarities and providing some nice jokes at each character's expense, which is a staple of any good epic rap battle. But the real stars are Pete and Lloyd. Lloyd as the Terminator is possibly one of the best character portrayals in the entire series. The vocal cadence, the mannerisms, and of course the accent all align with Arnold Schwarzenegger and still exaggerate in a very comedic way. Pete as RoboCop also matches up with that very well. Very stern, steady pace, and nice vocal effects. When ERB is clicking, RoboCop vs. Terminator is exactly what it looks and sounds like. I mentioned earlier that East vs. West was the right way to do a group matchup. Well, Artists vs. Turtles is probably the worst group matchup in all of ERB. In their first verse, the artists only get 4 bars to themselves, and the turtles only get half as much. That doesn't exactly give you a lot of time for their character portrayals to show very much, which sucks because you have Smosh and Rhett and Link in this, whose personalities can carry a lot of weight. The battle is just too short for any single character to build up very much flow. None of the cuts are very deep, and a lot of the disses in this battle are very surface level. No character gets enough screen time. It also doesn't help that on the Turtle side, Pete and Lloyd's characters are basically indistinguishable from each other. Maybe if this battle was longer it could have been salvaged, but to me, it's the worst season finale of ERB. And you'll find out what the best one is later on in this video. Jobs vs. Gates is hands down the catchiest battle in all of epic rap battles. They picked one of the best beats they could use for any battle and used it for this one. Everything flows perfectly from the very beginning. From Steve Jobs starting the battle early, the back and forth toward the middle of the battle, to Steve dying, and even the end with HAL 9000's verse. I mean, talk about one of the best aged verses in ERB history, what with AI becoming even bigger after this battle. Perhaps the only thing that aged better was Musk vs. Zuckerberg's matchup, as Elon Musk has since become a direct competitor to Mark Zuckerberg. But back to this battle, no lines are wasted. Since it's kind of a fast beat, this means they can pack deep, meaningful disses into a shorter time span. Every time I watch this, I notice something I didn't notice before. It's a great matchup, there's great writing, great execution, and as a standalone song, it's really catchy. You can't ask for much more. This next entry is a tie. I couldn't decide which of these was worse, so I decided to put them together as one entry. Back in 2012, Obama vs. Romney was a huge success. In fact, it narrowly missed the best portion of this list. It was funny, clever, catchy, and the end with Abraham Lincoln tied a nice bow over the whole thing. In the 2 election battles after that, the charm of the original battle wore off. Not because the election thing got old, but because they tried to fix something that wasn't broken. Like with the Jefferson vs. Douglas battle, these 2 battles basically have a predetermined winner before the battle even starts. At least with Jefferson vs. Douglas, you could maybe defend it by saying that in a battle of slave owner versus former slave, at least the moral framing predetermines the winner, not Pete and Lloyd's biases themselves. That excuse is completely out the window with these 2 battles. In Trump vs. Clinton, first of all, they chose Lloyd to play Trump instead of Pete, which is a decision I didn't like at the time, and I still don't. But at the end, Lincoln just flat out tells Hillary Clinton to beat Trump. In that battle, and a couple of others from that season, they had Matt Forio on as a writer. Dude is really talented, and I think the earlier version he vocalized was more comedic and an overall better battle. If I can find it, I'll link it in the description. With the 2020 election battle, Lincoln doesn't appear at the end, and the portrayals are really off. Trump is too self-aware in this version. Like, he knows he's awful and he just doesn't care. Whereas they put Joe Biden on a pedestal, which, to me, takes away the point of the battle. ERB fan interaction is supposed to be about viewers deciding which character won. It doesn't work if Pete and Lloyd decide that for you. Also, Kimmy Gatewood, I apologize for putting both of your battles on the worst list. It's nothing against you personally. Honestly, your acting was probably the best part of both of those. If you can't already tell, I'm into the really deep, saturated battles. Ones where Pete, Lloyd, and Zach really sink their teeth into the writing and references, and act those out really well. We get the trifecta here. Pete as Ivan the Terrible is everything you'd expect and more. He looks and sounds similar to what I'd expect from the actual Ivan the Terrible. Zack as Alexander the Great is really good as well. Of all the verses in ERB history, his is the one I'm most confident was written by Zack.
Reach for the glory I got from winning every single war that I fought. So this'll be straightforward. I'll take up this sword that I brought and slice you in half like the Gordian knot. And I'll soar to the top like the eagle whose feather I was forward. And the helmet that I wore as I swatted my many enemies, shattered them like a porcelain pot. And they'd be praying for the torture to stop.
It's got all the hallmarks of Zack Sherwin. Fast flow, intricate rhyme scheme, deep references, it's all there. Alexander the Great might be Zack's best role in the whole series, which is saying a lot because he's had some really good ones. Catherine the Great at the end also ties the battle together nicely, as it goes full circle with the Russian theme, but also with the great versus terrible theme, as the framing of Ivan battling all these greats from history is really clever, rather than just having them come in verse after verse. It makes it feel like these characters are really rapping against each other, and it helps immerse the viewer in the battle. This battle was really great, no pun intended, but there's one that's better. So before I get to my selection for worst battle, I think it would do some good to give a few dishonorable mentions. The first one I'd like to mention is Lady Gaga vs. Sarah Palin. At this point, I think ERB was still finding its bearings, so a few growing pains early on are to be expected. At least with that one, there are still a few funny jokes. Also, Banner vs. Jenner, for similar reasons to the two election battles and Jefferson vs. Douglas. What keeps it off the list is that it's very catchy to listen to, and there are some nice lines in there. So, what is the worst epic rap battle? In my opinion, hands down, it is Abe Lincoln versus Chuck Norris. I know Abraham Lincoln has sort of become a recurring character in ERB, but his first appearance wasn't in the best battle. I also did say that the Palin vs. Gaga battle could at least be excused by the team trying to get their bearings, but man, even for someone still trying to figure things out, some of the mistakes here are glaring. I mean, it's not Pete's fault. The Lincoln parts of the battle are probably the best parts. Chuck Norris's verses are basically just one verse that's only 4 bars, and then a second verse that is nothing but Chuck Norris jokes. In isolation, Chuck Norris jokes were already old in 2010 when this came out. In 2023, the lyrics of this battle have only aged worse and worse as time has gone on. Especially since we've seen what Pete and Lloyd are capable of since this happened. Not just in ERB, but also in their own music and in diss raps for hire. There really was no excuse to have an entire verse of Chuck Norris jokes. But alas, we probably wouldn't have gotten some of the best battles on this list without Pete and Lloyd making their mistakes in the beginning. Still, this one stings to go back and watch. I said earlier that you'd find out what my favorite season finale was. Well, before I get to that, let me give you a few honorable mentions. First is Jack the Ripper vs. Hannibal Lecter. This one, from start to finish, doesn't have a bad line or a filler line. I really wanted to find a place for this one, but just consider it number 6 on this list. I have a few more rapid-fire ones I want to mention, and they are Washington vs. Wallace, King vs. Poe, Bond vs. Powers, Blackbeard vs. Capone, and Wright Brothers vs. Mario Brothers. So, now that that's out of the way, you probably want to know what number 1 is, so let's not delay it any further. Yeah, it's Rasputin versus Stalin. And I think this is one of the more popular battles, and that's really because it capitalizes on an underrated aspect of ERB that not many people talk about: education. ERB was never meant to be an educational series. It just happened to inadvertently get people interested in these characters, especially some more obscure ones that you may not have heard of. If you don't know a lot about Russian history, you might be completely lost in some of the references on your first watch through. But the more times you watch, the more you understand, and the more you realize how genius this battle truly is. It's one of the amazing things about ERB, and it's why they've remained popular for this long. Having each of these figures from Russian history confront each other in a context never seen is eye-opening. There's so much packed into each line with this one, and there's even more than other battles because they bring 3 extra rappers in to give a verse. In this regard, I think it's better than Ivan versus Alexander, because when Lenin comes in, he's battling against both Rasputin and Stalin, whereas each of the greats is only talking to Ivan and not the other greats. I think this battle really shows the range Pete and Lloyd have as actors, as Pete plays 3 very different characters here and Lloyd plays 2. They don't mess up, and they're very in character. That's hard to do for multiple characters in the same battle. It's battles like these that make me respect Pete and Lloyd and the work that they do. Thanks for watching. Be sure to leave your favorites and least favorites in the comments, and I'll see you all in the next video.